Reading is the skill that the rest of our kids' education hinges on. No pressure, right? So many homeschooling parents get nervous thinking about how to teach reading. And if you clicked on this video hoping for some guidance and maybe some community, here's where we're headed. Today, we're going to be chatting all things typical and atypical reading, curriculum choices, interventions, and maybe when to consider a course change. And I am so grateful to have Melissa and Ashley with me today to share their experiences in the realm of reading. Let's start off where we're coming to the table from. Welcome, ladies. Ashley, do you mind sharing a little bit where you're coming from? Tell me about an experience you had as a kid, maybe connected to reading, learning to read, and how that informed how you teach reading now.
For sure. So what's funny is I don't even remember how I learned to read. Like I remember sitting in a circle and listening to my maybe second grade teacher reading Hank the Cow Dog, and she'd hand out little Skittles, and we'd be so quiet and we'd wait for those Starbursts or those Skittles. I remember also going to the library as a kid with my mom every time summer happened, and we'd come with these huge bags and we'd leave with so many books, and our job was just to read, and we loved it. My sister and I did, but I don't remember learning how to read. I just remember picking it up pretty easily, and it's always been easy for me. I've been in education for about 13 years, and I loved elementary education, always been in kinder, first, second, all the way to fifth, but my heart was in first grade, which is really a big reading grade. After about 6 years of that, I went into reading intervention and became an interventionist. And we would work with the bottom 4 struggling readers in the grade and try to get them up, the bottom 10% for the most part. I say 4, but I always had a caseload of about 4 to 6. And just watching them grow within 30 weeks was amazing. So that's where my heart always stuck. And that reading intervention is with those littles that struggled, and all they really needed was more time.
That's
But
awesome. Awesome. And you're currently homeschooling
I
your own your
am.
2 littles are 4 and
Yes.
2. So maybe
Yes,
beginning that process. That's pretty cool.
absolutely.
All right, cool. And Melissa, tell us a little bit about experience you had and maybe your current homeschool situation.
So I'm probably a little random. I grew up not knowing I was dyslexic. So I started school and I was just behind all the time. I was put into they only just had one big room where they put all the kids that just had some sort of, they weren't keeping up. And that's where we all went. So there was everything from kids that really needed help, and then me, who they just couldn't quite figure out why I couldn't grasp it. And I was just stuck in there, and I never really learned how to read. I kind of did it more probably on my own and what I could learn as my mom was teaching me stuff. But it wasn't until I was probably in middle school before I started reading on my own. And then I just couldn't stop. I read everything I could get my hands on. And it wasn't until high school when somebody was like, hey, I think you're dyslexic, and that's what's going on here. And I think it opened all the doors, like immediately. Once you understood what was wrong, that really helped.
That's amazing. That's huge. And you're currently homeschooling your 3 kiddos
Three.
that are 9, 5, and 3. Sorry.
Yes. Yep.
9, 5, and 3.
So,
Okay.
and we've learned Callie, which is my oldest, she's also dyslexic. And we've learned that my middle son does have ADHD, but that's as much as we got from him so far. We don't,
Yeah. It
it's,
takes time.
it's genetic.
Mhm.
Dad and I both have things, so it just kind of passes along.
Gotcha. Well, and I love that you already are on the lookout for it. So that's huge too. We're going to go down that road in a little bit. That's huge. Let's kind of back up a little bit from our experience, our collective teaching experience, teaching our own kids and teaching in the classroom. Let's kind of take a look at typical reading lane. So Ashley, I'm going to kind of defer to you on this because while I did teach some first, second, and third grade, and I have taught my own 4 kids how to read, there's a little bit more theory perhaps that you're well versed in here. So I would love for you to kind of take us through the typical phases perhaps of learning to read. What
Yeah,
do we
for
start with?
sure. I think 100% reading, or the love of reading, actually starts in the parent's lap. So, I mean, even when they're babies, you read to them, and then the bond that you create with them in your lap, and the bond that they see with, oh, there's books in my room, or there's books in the living room. Just seeing the love of literacy at such a young age. Like I always say, my daughter was immersed in literacy at a young age. There were letters everywhere in her toys, and they weren't, let's sit down and play with these, but there were foam letters in the bathtub. There were wooden puzzles with letters in it. There were books with letters in it. There were fuzzy books. Just having those around at such a young age is key to creating that love for literacy. And not the, oh, I have to sit down and read. That, and then a lot of reading aloud at a young age. I mean, reading those stories. My daughter's 4 and she loves Junie B. Jones right now. She's not reading it, but she listens to me read it. So just starting young like that is important. Just that oral language and hearing the way that the books sound, seeing that you're going left from right. This is the cover. This is the back. This is how I turn the page. I read from left to right. Then I do this return sweep. Those are the concepts of print that we really introduce to kids. And usually that's parent or teacher led, and the kid is next to you and they're seeing that. After they have that, really, to me, as an, it's hard. Like teaching wise is very different from being a homeschool teacher wise. But I can say that the number one thing is phonological awareness right now. Like first comes letters, right? Like you have to know your letters and you have to know those sounds. After you get that, it's all about hearing things. So can my kid hear a rhyme? Can my kid make a rhyme? Can my child tell blending? If I say k, at, can they put that together and say cat? Or if I give them the word cat, can they break those phonemes or those sounds apart? K, at, cat. Or if I say dog, can they tell me, oh, dog is d, ah, g. There's 3 sounds in that word. So it's all about hearing before seeing. And I think that a lot of times parents are like, well, here's a book. Let's read this book. Let's go. Let's read this pattern book. And you can't jump into it like that. You've got to start with those basics of, can you hear me manipulate this word? Can you create words with onset and rhyme? So it's those little pieces of phonological awareness that really are the founding blocks, the foundation to beginning to read. And then after that, I know this is a huge kind of, I'm not going to do that. Some parents are against it, but I will tell you that sight words are really important. I mean, I know that some people are like, I don't want to do flashcards and I don't care about that list, but there's more than just flashcards out there. They've got to have that rote, I hate to say memorization, but they've got to know those words, that those are what people get stuck on because it's not all visual for the most part. You've got to also have that meaning behind it, that language structure behind it when you're learning to read. And then there's that visual part. But sight words don't follow any of those rules, those spelling rules or those sound rules. So sight words are a big one out there. I know you don't want to hear it, some parents, but it really does matter.
Yeah.
But those are the basics for sure.
Absolutely. Okay. And then getting into there, and then you're kind of putting shorter books in front of them. This whole time there are books, but they have varying amounts of words per page. Hello, little friend. And so, little by little, we're bringing in more of those, which I love. And I know you said maybe no flashcards. We have these like paint chips from Home Depot, and so just writing
so many fun
writing the words on there, get their favorite colors. We have them on a ring.
Yes, we do a lot of like read, build, write. So they read it, then they build it with Play-Doh or they build it with buttons. It's something with their hands, right? Because when they're learning to build, they're learning to spell. And when you're learning to spell, it ties back to reading and it ties back to writing. All of these literacy things are all embedded in everything that they do. And sight words, they're a huge part of our language as well. And there's some games that my kids play with index cards and then they slap them with a fly swatter. I mean, there are so many games out there that the kids love with it.
Totally. So we don't need to hit tech either because there are some fun tech things. Nearpod is one of them that I talk about a lot. What were you going to say?
Oh, no, I don't even remember.
Oh, sorry. But there's so many good ones out there and so many good resources. Teachers Pay Teachers. I love Teachers Pay Teachers. Go there, find the free stuff, see what you love, go back and buy the whole bundle, whatever the person is selling, because there's so many good things out there. Okay, so this is typical reading lane. Now, there are a few sing-songy things. There are a few rhymes that we could talk about. talk about silent E. E is a bossy letter. It's not going to play with you, but it's going to make the other kids say its name, the other vowel. And then we've got 2 vowels go walking. First one does the talking. So there are all these things that we can kind of come back to, touch base on, and make sure that kids kind of have a reference point. We might even bring in bilingualism in a little bit, but I want to hear from Melissa so that we can get into non-typical reading paths. I want to hear your experience with this. I know atypical paths are going to be atypical even from each other. So there's no right path or right answer here. What's been your experience with, especially for your oldest who has already been diagnosed with dyslexia?
We started with All About Reading mostly because I knew I had issues and that maybe it would start with something that I knew was an open and go, and I didn't have to try to teach it because I knew I didn't know all the rules because I missed like those 4 years of school being in another classroom. And I knew that she was going to need more support just because I didn't have that. As we got going, I learned, hey, she needs more support than just because I don't know what I'm doing here. So I ended up learning All About Reading pushes no sight words, but I did learn with Callie with dyslexia, because decoding's so hard for her, sight word memorization was super important because she wasn't getting it. We spent 2 years, I think, trying just to get the decoding down. She knew her letters, she knew her phonograms, but she just could not connect that decoding. And that only happened this year, and she's just going into 4th grade now. But sight words really were what really helped bridge that gap. It's different for each kid probably, but for her that really, really helped.
That's huge. And have you liked All About Reading so far?
Oh, we love it.
Sounds like it's been a win.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to throw out these recommendations because I know people might be grasping at straws. Hey, this isn't working. Try that. We'll link all these below, you guys. Okay, great. Anything else there that you want to share about in terms of maybe in your experience? What was something that kind of, you said it was middle school when kind of the switch flipped. What was that like for you?
It was so crazy to actually be able to like just read when everybody else like had got it much sooner. I still can't spell well. Using All About Spelling has actually helped me more because I'm like, oh wait, there's rules that go with all this. What?
Totally.
But as like a little kid trying to like decode it and learn the rules at the same time, it was just too much. So it's just been, I think it's more eye-opening to myself, to be honest, in a way. So
yeah, that's huge. Ashley, would you add anything to that in terms of other atypical kind of reading paths that kids have gone on in your experience that you've seen?
Well, I have a question for you, Melissa, before we get to that. So tell me, whenever you were diagnosed, I taught 1st grade for a long time. And 1st grade, a lot of parents had some questions like, is my kid dyslexic? They haven't really started moving forward in reading. And usually there's leveled readers, right? And usually at about a D to an E or an E to an F, A being the early beginners, Z, way down the line. But into 1st grade is probably a D, E, F in Texas, somewhere around there, usually a C, D, but sometimes up to an E. But when you get to that D, E, F transition, a lot of sight words are there, more difficult sight words. And there's more than 2 sentences per page. So it got more text on the page. And that's when a lot of parents, when they didn't see that growth, or teachers didn't either, one of the main spelling was there. There's all these little things for dyslexia and about into 1st grade, but they'd wait to test until about 2nd grade, unless parents took them to like Cooks or to Medical City or a hospital to do it that way. But now, let's see, when I taught kinder, maybe 3 years ago, they have in the state of Texas, like an all-base into kindergarten pre-dyslexia screener to see if they're doing any, like if they have any signs or symptoms early on, and they do it again in 1st grade. So I know things are different now, but I'm wondering how it was back then,
So when I was little in kindergarten, I was fine in kindergarten. I knew my phonograms, I knew my letters. That was great. It was when I went into 1st grade, they're like, hey, she's not catching this. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was just the times or my school that I was in, they just stuck me in what they would have called the special ed class then. And I was just stuck there until fourth grade. And then in fifth grade, they're like, well, she's not learning anything more in here, and she's not learning anything there. Let's just put her back in normal class in fifth grade and she'll be fine. And that's just what happened. there was
Yeah.
no there was no good plan, there was no good diagnosis. There were many teachers in my high school that you probably have, but I didn't get diagnosed myself until Callie was diagnosed. Like we kind of all knew I had it at that point, but I never had a formal diagnosis until then.
Yeah. What year, like what decade was that?
I was born in 88, so it would have
Okay.
been like early 90s.
So we're about the same then.
Yeah.
So I remember kids, they'd be pulled and they went to content mastery back then. But being in education, content mastery is totally different now. And then labels are thrown out there all the time. And it's just so different. So it's interesting to see from our, 80s babies, 90s babies, what it was like compared to these kids nowadays in school and how they're diagnosed, some early, super, super early. And what is the statistics? Is it like 20% of our world or the population is dyslexic, or is it?
It's fairly just I don't know actually. I guess I don't know, but I feel like it's higher than it should. Like I feel like it's higher than we think it should be.
Yes,
Like,
absolutely. There's
yeah.
this big debate in the educational world that it's because of the lack of phonics. That's why a lot of kids are diagnosed with dyslexia. And then there's this, like, what is the new thing? Science of reading. And then they go back on certain things because you can't just teach phonics by itself. I mean, it has to all be blended. But I know things like that, the explicit teaching is of phonics and those vowel patterns and the CVC words and CVCe, all those rules are so important in the dyslexia program because it teaches you how words work.
I know when I was in school, because I remember my mom talking about it, it's slightly off topic, but it's phonograms. It was when our school had just started implementing phonograms. So teaching, for whatever they taught, like to spell phone with an F in the phonogram, like early phonograms, like that's how it sounds. So that's how we're going to
Inventive
spell
spelling,
it.
probably.
Yeah. And my mom to this day blames that for my inability to spell, but it's just my dyslexia. I can't decode it. So, and I think that change in the school at the same time that I was going through there, I think I just kind of fell through there's nothing really wrong, but there's definitely something wrong.
Right.
Early 90s, and just kind of fell through until I was older.
Yeah. And the thing with us and our generation, I mean, Hooked on Phonics was huge when I was growing up. I remember telling my mom, I want to do Hooked on Phonics. And my mom was like, you can read. Why do you need Hooked on Phonics? Because all of those infomercials or whatever on it.
Yeah.
And being a reading teacher or seeing kids when I'd have, and every October in the fall, we'd kind of go over all of our early literacy testing in kinder and first, and even in second grade, and have parent conference week. And during that, we kind of let them know, hey, this is where your child is. This is what's going on. But I remember a lot of kids, our parents, especially in K and 1, they think it's all visual when they read. They're like, no, sound it out, sound it out. And me as a reading teacher, my heart cringes. And I'm like, no, don't just tell them to sound it out, because there are in the English dictionary, in the English language, like sound, we have so many different sounds. And it's a balanced literacy system with meaning and structure and visual. And you have all of those cues and clues and prompts to use. And a lot with a lot of the times with my dyslexia students, well, any student, they'd go strictly to visual. And I'm like, no. Think about what is going on here. Look at the picture. What's happening? And they build that meaning in their brain. And then they think, okay, what could sound? And knowing the English language and the structure of our language, what could sound right here? Let me cross-check with visuals to see if that would make sense. So a lot of the time growing up, we were told, like, let's sound it out. Look at the letters. What is it? But it's such a balanced system with meaning and structure and visual. And I think that really helps some of my dyslexia students, like building that schema in their background, the background of their brain. Like, oh, I wish I had a direct answer for you. I wish I could say, hey, go to this hotline and call this number, or hey, Google this, or, and a lot of times there's lots of homeschool networks out there, Facebook groups and co-ops and things like that. And people know that I'm a reading specialist. So they ask me, and the best advice that I could give is look into your community and ask. I'd be happy to assess like people in my area. I'd love to eventually put something together online where I could teach a parent how to do this, because sometimes if what I found during COVID, whenever we had to start the year off online, some of these kids have never read anything before. So then you put it on a computer screen and their mind thinks it's a video game. So their eyes are all over the screen trying to track something, when really tracking is such a huge skill at an early age, reading left to right, knowing word for word for word, and letters put together make words. And so it's hard to say find someone online, which could be an option. But I think someone talking to your child or talking to you in person and teaching you or telling you what to do, so then you can assess your child in front of them, so they have it in front of their eyes. That's an idea. Another idea, like I said, is use your resources. Look in your neighborhood. There are retired teachers out there, especially retired reading teachers, reading interventionists, that I've seen in the Metroplex where I live, that have started things like that. Some of you may have a great pediatrician and they may have a resource to go to, but I wish I had here's the best answer out of everything. But as homeschool moms, we all know, like, you have to do your research and you have to see what's going to be best for you in your area and your situation. But usually, as all of us know as parents, if you have a hunch that something's wrong, most likely something is wrong. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a learning disability or there is something so detrimental to their progress. It could just mean, you might be missing one skill. You might be giving too much at one time instead of doing direct intervention on one thing and then monitoring that. It might be the consistency. You're doing it every day, but maybe for a minute a day, 5 minutes a day, 3 times a week, instead of, rigorously every day, 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and then keeping track of that for maybe 6 weeks and seeing if they progress on that. So there's lots of little things out there, but as a homeschool mom, you know what to do. Like, get out there and research and see what's best, or see what's there available for you.
And looking at the curriculum that you're using, we use The Good and the Beautiful, which has reading assessments in there. So, see how many words they can read in 60 seconds. See how many words, see how long it takes them to read this passage, mark the number of errors. For those who haven't been in a classroom and given one of these assessments, that was new to me. When I first started teaching first grade, I was like, whoa, what is this? Because I was teaching middle school Spanish. And so it's a whole new world. So if you're new to this, like I also was, there's a little bit to learn, but these assessments are out there. So number one, look for them, print them out. I think that's a great point, Ashley. I love online education, but this is probably one of those things that needs to be done in person. Melissa, I want to hear how did you look for diagnostic testing for your daughter in terms of kind of getting this diagnosis?
So to start with, I didn't do anything because I was like, I'm homeschooling. We don't need to have labels. What's that? That's not necessary. And in some places it really isn't. We bounced from All About Reading, and when I realized that she wasn't getting it, and I thought maybe it was the program, I bounced to The Good and the Beautiful. Although we went through 3 of those and she still wasn't reading. So I just bounced her back to All About Reading and was like, all right, well, let's figure out why you're getting through these lessons, but you're not learning to read. And then it became, I think it's enough that I thought, I'm not an expert in this. I'm learning my own diagnosis as I'm going and how things were different when I was a kid. So I was like, why don't we just go ahead and reach out to, I think what are they called? I can't think of it. My husband's work. There's like a free therapist thing, like a hotline number. It is a hotline number. And you call the number and they give you a therapist. And that's what we did. Employment, I don't know. Employee something or other, EAP or something.
I know, yes.
Yes, thank you. I was like,
I know what you're talking about. It's kind of like they give you a list of people that you can, a referral list.
Yeah. And since it's part of that employee assistant plan thing, it's free for like 10 things. And it was just enough lessons to get her an actual diagnosis and give me a little bit more, I'm going the right direction. And every kid is different. Even if A and B student are both dyslexic, A and C item might actually help A and B student. Like unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a set, hey, this is what you should do if your kid is autistic or dyslexia or any of the above. It's just what works for them.
Hey, I'm so glad you have that though. That's huge. So listen, and if you are kind of in that point where you're like, need to get something done, ask around. Moms love helping each other. Parents love helping each other. Ask around. figure out what you can do. And look online, start online, ask around. Actually, I like your idea of maybe putting together a course or a training little
for sure. I'm already
class
thinking
for
I'm going to
parents.
talk with you, Melissa. We're going to talk.
Let's do it. Let's do it. But I think that would be huge because number one, empowering the parent to then, do this for kids 2, 3, and 4, if that's the case, or be able to just meet the need where it's happening right now. That is really important. So I think that would be really cool. Let's check on any other curriculum or resources that we have loved for teaching reading, typical or atypical. I mentioned The Good and the Beautiful. Melissa, all about reading. Ashley, what have you loved for reading? And then we can also add in some more, Melissa, if you're noodling some that you've loved. Ashley, what have you loved?
So I actually write my own curriculum. When I worked in public schools, I was on a curriculum team, and we went through our standards. And we kind of have a process from some huge researchers called the DeFours on the 4 critical questions on what a kid really needs to learn, why they need to learn this, what do they do if they don't understand it, and what do you do if they do understand it. So it hits all of those, like baseline. What are they learning? How are you going to teach it? What happens if they don't know it? What happens if they do know it? For intervention and extension for the most part. So there's a process to do that. And then you find your essentials or your power standards. And those power standards, a lot of you may be like, well, as homeschool parents, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. And you might be like, well, that's from the state, that's from the government, I'm not going to do that. However, those standards serve a purpose. For example, a power standard in kindergarten, maybe identifying numbers 1 to 20, knowing standard form and word form and the counting 1 to 1. And those things, although it's assigned by the government, it's still something kids need to know, right? Like you need to know your numbers, or knowing the concept, understanding the concept of addition and subtraction in kindergarten. That's a power standard. They have to know that, knowing that adding means getting more and subtracting means taking away. So based off of those power standards, those are just some examples. And for kindergarten, some in 3rd grade would be place value up to the thousands or the 10,000 or to the 10,000s place, right? Like you just have these standards, and the power standards are the ones that you want your kid to know before they move on, and they're the main ones. So we have a list of power standards for each grade, and then based off of those, we backward design, or I backward design my curriculum. I create my questions or my formative assessments where this is what I want them to know. What am I going to do to make sure they know this? How do I know they're going to know this? So that's what I do. I start off pretty basic in kinder with letter ID, and really it has to be their letters and sounds. They have to know their letters and sounds. It's a lot of shared reading, big books. And writing. I know a lot of people are like, why are they writing in 1st grade and kindergarten? And I'm like, they should be writing when they're like 2 or 3. And writing doesn't mean like, let me write a story to you. Writing means let me draw a picture for you. Let me tell you about this picture with my words. My daughter has been writing stories. I say they're stories, and she thinks she's a writer too. And she 100% is a writer. But it's so important for that. Like she thinks she's an author, and she is an author, but she'll draw doodles. I mean, the progression of writing is beautiful. And once you start it, it doesn't matter what age group it is. They progress naturally as they go. And eventually they start with scribbles, and then they start with egg people, and then they start with more details, and then they start labeling their picture, and then they start writing sentences. And then from there, it just goes beautifully. But for reading, for the most part, I teach it myself. We start with a lot of phonological awareness. From there, it's lots of games, lots of stories aloud, lots of writing, doodling in our science journal. After we go outside and work in the garden, we come in and we draw what we did and we talk about it. Sight word games, just to introduce some of those little sight words. But that is one big thing too, is leveled readers. Like leveled readers are huge for us. One thing
Where do you get leveled readers?
So I wish that libraries could actually check them out because they're quite expensive. Thankfully, in my schoolhouse, my boss actually purchased a wonderful library that I found. But there are Houghton Mifflin is a really good one. I'll provide you with a list of vendors that actually provide them. To me, really, K through 2 is the biggest. If you use it once in kinder, you're going to use it again until 2nd grade. if you buy the set that goes from A to M, right? But you'll use them again and again and again for all of your kids. So it's worth the investment. And again, homeschool is really big in community. If you look within your community, maybe you could set up at your own little library. I would say a grade level kit for kindergarten and first grade, which really first grade will go to level M. Depending on your state, but I would get one that went to level M, so A through M, which would probably be about $2,500. I know that's expensive, but it comes with a lot of good things. It comes with fiction, it comes with nonfiction, it comes with fairy tales, it comes with all different genres. And within those books, you're going to be teaching some of those comprehension strategies that a lot of parents forget about sometimes, because you learn how to read, right? K through K1, you learn how to read, but then second and above, you read to learn. And you have to set them up in K through 1 to understand what reading to learn is by asking questions, by retelling, by paraphrasing, by inferring, all of these big comprehension strategies. And these books are wonderful with it. But again, if you have a couple families, you guys can also like throw in a little bit and then create a system where you check out from someone's house or, someone's garage, or even reach out to your public library to reach out to your public library to see if they'd possibly invest in that for your homeschool community and have a checkout list that way. But the little readers are amazing.
That's great.
I can't stress that enough. And a big question sometimes I get in our homeschool community is, how do I know what level to put my kids on? Like, what does this mean? And that's something I'm working on now. Is A is just basically a 3 to 4 word sentence. And it's pretty much the same pattern because you're teaching them at that young of an age, like 1-to-1 ratio. I read left to right, and one word means something's going to come out of my mouth here. And then when you get to, B, it might be there's a pattern change at the end, but a lot of pattern books in the beginning. And then you add more of a storyline whenever you get, or a plot, problem, solution as you get higher in those reading levels. But they're pretty important. And
They're important.
and it's hard because so many out there. You go to Walmart or you go to a bookstore and it's like level 1, level 2, and parents don't know what that means. And I look at it and I'm like, oh no, honey, this is a level E. This is not a level 1. Like, no, do not give that to your 5-year-old.
Yeah.
They're going to struggle, and their brain only holds so much before they're tired.
Yeah.
And so book choice is huge. Book choice is so huge.
And having that option, there's a plethora of books at your fingertips, child. What would you like to choose? And if they, randomly pick an F and they're like, what is this? It's easy enough to just be like, hey, let's try this one with me and see if it works. We use Reading A to Z. I work for someone who gives me the possibility to access those and all the worksheets that come with it. And we just print those off in multiple languages, which is great because we're a trilingual family. But there are those options out there. So I love that. I'm going to grab that list from you after and we'll link that. Melissa, talk to me about some other things that you've enjoyed, perhaps in your own experience, or what you found for your kiddos that's worked well so far.
So as a homeschooling community, I'm sure this is fairly controversial, but I knew I needed extra help. So I enrolled Callie into an e-campus, which is technically a public school, but they use the Timberdoodle kits I was already using. So I was like, well, okay. And it gives me an extra person to bounce ideas off of. And it did give me access to STAR testing. So I have been giving Callie the STAR testing 3 times a year because that's what they offer. And they don't make us do it. But I found it incredibly helpful to see if what we're using is actually helping Callie. So like she started the year at 1 level and she's gone up almost 200 points, which I guess the teacher was telling me they only go up 100 points a year or something like that. And so she went from a pre-K level this year to about middle of 2nd grade, which is huge. I mean, she's still behind, but it's still huge. But it means that we're finally finding something that's working, and she's getting there. And I think sometimes it just helps kind of going outside the box a little bit and finding, I was very against, allowing any of the state stuff into our homeschool, but it helped. And
it does.
If it helps, it helps. So
yeah.
And then,
bravo for bending that rule, perhaps for whenever it's needed. Right. Yeah.
I was like, but I homeschool. I can't do that. There was no good reason why. I was just like, I can't. So I don't know. I think it helped having another person to bounce ideas off of and know that, we are going on the right track here.
Cool. There are, I would mention if you don't have a state, I live abroad, for example. And so I don't have a state DOE that I can bounce ideas off of or get resources from. And so we often look online, and there are experts out there. There are reading tutors. If you need one, leave a comment. We'll get you connected. We've got plenty of reading specialists that I'm sure that we could recommend. But those options are out there. And I think the idea is just look around, see what's available to you that's within your budget, and ask around. A lot of people are willing to help. I love this, you guys. These are great. Anything else, Melissa?
A note of what you said about living abroad.
Mhm.
I happen to notice there are multiple kids in the campus that we're using that is abroad because of the open laws, like the open homeschool rules in Wisconsin. They're allowed to allow transfers in from anywhere. So sometimes it just helps Googling, and it wasn't easy to find, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
But they do exist out there on occasion.
Yeah. You do have to ask people, and ask people who are currently using it, not people who are scared of it or not up for it. There are a lot of states out there that offer funding. And if you talk to people on the ground who are using, a lot of times they're using it very well and enjoying it. So that's awesome. Okay, you guys, for the people whose kids seem on track, let's talk about extension. Ashley, you mentioned extension. What if something is going well? You've got a little author on your hands. What are you doing to kind of push that next level for her and keep her challenged?
Yeah, I love enrichment, and it is one of my favorite things to do. I believe my little one is a gifted learner, so I've always got to find certain things that push her even more. That's one of the main, I've got a lot of main reasons. I always say that. I'm always like, that's one of the main reasons I homeschool. But
Feeling good
one of
about
the
it, though.
top reasons I do homeschool is because she was always, in education. She'd be at my school with me when I was getting things ready, and she's always been immersed in literacy, and I have to keep her challenged. And if not, she'd get bored, and she'd be she knows a lot when she's in there. And I think that the other teachers the teacher would focus on the kids that need that push and that to get them on level, right, in public school. So yeah, a lot of it is comprehension, especially in reading. Asking them those questions. Like, one thing we're learning about right now is character traits, the internal character traits and external character traits and motives. Asking a lot of questions. Why did the character do that? Why do you think she did that? What made her do that? And having them become those critical thinkers where they're putting themselves in someone else's shoes to figure out what I'm asking them about the problem. So it's a lot of depth into it, especially inferring, why do you think they did that? Give me your evidence to prove that. So tie your evidence, what you see, into it with your own logic and reasoning, and explain that to me. A lot of it too is having them ask questions. So if they can read anything, right? Once they pass that level and they're like, oh, I can decode, I can decipher, I can figure out all of these things, then it's like, okay, well, let me read it into chapter books. There's not a lot of pictures in it, but what can I do to make my kid really go off with their reading? And it's really about those comprehension strategies. One that we really do too is asking questions, like before we read, what do you think is going to happen here? And then writing those questions down. And then while they're reading, you can come up with questions while you're reading too, and then come back and answer them. And then after you're reading, do you have any burning questions about that? So asking questions, making predictions. Research is another big one. Teaching them how to research, teaching them how to collect facts. And then after they do all of that, how do they paraphrase those so they're not copying? And how do you organize all of those thoughts into writing? And how do you create your own book? Or then bring it to technology. How can you create your own vlog? Or how can you create your own medium, so to say, to express this to other people? That's the fun thing. I think as they grow as a reader. Another thing we've really been doing is connections. That's a big one, like connecting text to self. How am I connecting this book to my life? Or text to text? How can I connect this book to this book? And the way your brain connects those. Or text to world. We do a lot of that. But she connects with the world by just talking about connections, and how even when reading a book, you can make those connections. Or when you look in the sky, you make those connections. So really, those comprehension, expanding your thoughts with these comprehension and writing those down. That's a really big way to do enrichment and to take their thinking from one level to the next.
I share a lot about working with gifted kids, and especially our 2E learners. And so
Yes.
Melissa, I don't want to step aside from what we were talking about before, because there are those extension things, especially with kiddos with other learning needs. Do you want to share a little bit about how you've seen Kelly kind of work on this?
We personally, because I know my own limitations, we use Hide the Chocolate. She does a literature thing with different books, and I also use Mazdas, and Opal is what we're in right now. But on the flip side of that, my 3-year-old knows all of her letters and phonograms, so I kind of she's just been around and she's catching on fast. So I kind of got both ends of that spectrum where I'm just like, Mom!
But it's so fun. And I feel like you can. I'm going to have to look up those things that you mentioned. Are those like incentive things or other programs that kind of challenge you?
Comprehension. They handle a lot of comprehension with literacy.
Okay.
So
All
like Hide the Chocolate, we're doing a book study on Narnia at the moment. So it's fun for them, but then they're also having to she adds those little rabbit trails where now they're also learning about the World War, and they're learning what an air raid is, and they're learning about the different animals that live over in Europe, and they're catching on way more than just the Book of Narnia. So it's those extra little literature questions, and what would you think it would be like to live where there's only snow, and adding things I wouldn't think to ask her, because I wouldn't know that. I don't have a degree in any of this, so
that's great.
I bring all the resources
a lesson
to me
to learn too. Use those resources. That's great. And I think there's something to be said here for unit studies and bringing in other content areas to our reading. So even with the little kids, we'll often we use Libby, the Libby app, where it connects to our public library in the US, and we can check out those audiobooks. And then we've got the physical book in their lap, and they're following along, they're reading along. So even for the kiddos who might not understand 100% of what they're reading with their eyes, they are also hearing it, and they can definitely catch on that way. And that way, as a family, we can bring in other topics as well, be it history or science or whatever. So very fun. Okay, you guys, I love where this has gone. We've covered a lot of ground. Typical, atypical, these different phases, different curriculum ideas, ways to reach out, ways to get diagnostics done. So again, we'll link all of that below. But as you guys are working in your own spheres, I just love hearing what people are excited about, what they're working on. So either personally or professionally, could you share a little bit about what you're up to or looking forward to in the next 6 months or so? What's going on in your neck of the woods that you're excited about? Ashley, can we start with you?
Yeah. So honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is our garden. Just because we have our own garden in our backyard, but we also have a farmhouse garden, and we just planted we started 48 tomato seedlings for our fall harvest. And right now in our garden, it's huge. I mean, we've got corn, we've got peppers, we've got tomatoes, we've got broccoli, we've got carrots, we've got everything, and it's huge because it's on a farm. And then we have our backyard container garden here. But that's one big thing. I'm looking forward to sharing all the canning and everything we're doing with that. I'm super excited. It's funny, I had a conversation with my neighbor, and right now my mentality is and my focus is my family and making sure that they're good and everything. Their little journey is wonderful, and their educational journey is wonderful, and my students, that's my main focus. However, I am working on getting some phonological awareness kind of pointers and cues for parents so that they know what to look for whenever they're starting to teach their kids how to read, kind of like a pre-assessment to say, okay, my kid knows to rhyme. I don't need to spend too much time on that. Let me go to blending sounds, or let me go to manipulating sounds. So kind of like just a pre-check, a precursor, pre-assessment for that. And then also another thing I'm starting to work on is kind of giving parents an idea of, okay, this is what a level A looks like. This is what I would find in these books. This is what a level B would look like, all the way up to probably an M, where typically second graders in, but at that point, they pretty much know how to read, and you're going to be transitioning to the reading to learn era, as I call it.
Yeah.
So just some pointers for parents to say, okay, let me look in this book and see where my kid falls, or this is where my kid needs to start, just to help them out a little bit.
I love that. Very cool. All right. Well, keep me in the loop. But if you guys want to follow along with Ashley, make sure you say thank you to her for being here. All that will be below. Melissa, what about you? What are you up to?
I actually have a 1,000 square foot garden too. Like, I don't know how big yours is. But
Garden friends. Oh,
we have so much, but we're here in town, so it's like 90% of our yard.
that's awesome.
It's so sad, right? Like, it all looks like so tiny and like needs weeding, and by this fall it'll be huge and have tons of tomatoes and tons of cannon. And
We're in Texas, so it is so hot. I'm like, my tomatoes are up. I mean, I'm getting a really good harvest right now, but I'm like, this heat is about to just buy tomatoes, like come July, But that's why we started our fall garden, and all my brassica is like already flowered, so we're gonna wait on that until the fall. But Wisconsin, I'm sure, is a lot more cooler than Texas.
yeah, we only just planted like 4 weeks ago, I think.
Oh.
So everything's still really tiny and kind of growing and
Yeah,
working on itself yet. My raspberries are early, so I've got a whole thing of those already. And my cherry tree is giving us cherries, so that's been really
we can't do that in Texas. It's way too hot. I'm already thinking, like, I did strawberries and they died a long time ago, because we're almost in the hundreds soon.
Oh yeah. We don't get there until July, so
Man, we started planting all of our seedlings in January, late January, because in March we start transplanting in like mid-March. So
we still had snow in early May.
that's we never get snow. Randomly we'll get it, but that's
What
exciting.
a contrast.
Right?
Yay. Cool. Anything else you want to share that we're working on?
Me personally, I actually got invited to work with the King of Random. They're opening a homeschool classroom like thing. So that's what a lot of my stuff has been doing right now, is trying to figure out how they want to handle that and do that. So their goal is to open more of like his YouTube channel stuff into a more in-depth science and STEM for homeschool families.
Very cool. Oh my gosh. Well, make sure you follow along with Melissa and Ashley. And again, all of their stuff will be linked below. You guys, thank you so much for being here. It is so fun to kind of hear. I feel like a lot of times we get stuck in our own little homeschool bubbles. And so it's really fun to hear from others and bring in our experiences, be it our own as students and from our classroom years. So thank you two for being here. And to those of you who are watching, thank you. If nobody's told you yet today, thank you for doing what you're doing. It's really important. Happy teaching, guys.